American Airman. I am a warrior. I have answered my nation's call. I am an American Airman. My mission is to fly, fight, and win. I am an American Airman, wingman, leader, warrior. I will never leave an airman behind. I will never falter, and I will not fail.
That's got to be a thing now. Okay, I got wrapped up in that one. I'm not going to lie. I totally spaced and have no idea how to launch into this. Just kidding. We're starting at the beginning. And the beginning of the Air Force is basic military training, right? So you have BMT after you have signed up, sworn in, and then you have to leave and go to Lackland Air Force Base, Texas, or JBSA Lackland in Texas, where you spend 8 weeks learning how to be an airman, which kind of sounds cheesy on one hand, but on the other hand, what you're in for and what you have to learn and the changes that you're going to go through are not cheesy. Like, I joined when I was 25 years old, thought I kind of had it figured out. I was not even ready for it. It was better and bigger than I ever imagined, and it was one of the coolest things I've ever had the opportunity to do. So for today's show, we are going to go in depth, all things basic military training, and I pulled a couple of strings and got us a real life TI. It is a basic military training instructor. These dudes are no joke. And the guys and girls that do this job are some of the most intense and squared away airmen I have ever seen or had the privilege of meeting. And I've actually met quite a few TIs, and they're cut from the same cloth. It is pretty wild. So I'm very excited to introduce you guys to him in a little bit. But before we get started, I want to show you guys one of our newest videos. And this one is kind of a hype video about quality of life, Air Force, what it's like to do what you love in and out of uniform. So with that, let's hit that video.
I want it all and I'm winning it. I do not care about opinions. I'm to make a few decisions. I can't see myself falling. I gotta grab it, there's no time for stalling. Number one stunner, don't have other options. Now I'm fired up. I'm sorry, brother, your time's up. I see the top and I climb up. I came from the ashes, I rise up. I want it now and I ain't never gon' back down. I want it now and I ain't never gon' back down. I want it now and I ain't never gon' back down. I want it now and I ain't never gon' back down. Said I'm fired up. I'm sorry, your time's up. I see the top and I climb up. Came from the ashes, I rise up.
Ooh, airplanes and motorcycles. Yeah, I'm sitting back here jiving. That was cool. I love that one. Okay, so that's what it looks like on a lot of people's day. Like, so you could be kind of doing your own thing on your own time and then transition those skills into what you do in the military. And if you're passionate about something, the Air Force has pretty much every single job you can think of that will transition over from your passion or from something that you're interested in, or even your education or previous work experience. So in order to do that, in order to get in, you got to go talk to a recruiter. You know where to find that, airforce.com. Get that recruiter locator tool. There it is. And that's the QR code to get it. Get you a recruiter, ask all your questions, get them answered, swear in, and then ship off for basic military training. And to help us get to know all the things that we want to know about basic military training, I am privileged to introduce Tech Sergeant Griffith. He is joining us from the studio all the way 20 feet down the hall. So welcome to the show. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, sir?
Well, thank you very much for having me on the show today. I really appreciate having this opportunity. But just a little bit about myself. As you said, I'm Technical Sergeant Michael Griffith. I've been in the Air Force for 17 years. I started off in an AFSC, as you know, many of you may or will, which is medical laboratory technician. I did that for the majority of my time in the Air Force, but for the past 4 years specifically, I've been a military training instructor where I pushed many flights, by which I mean lead flights of trainees, trained MTIs, and I've also had the opportunity to work within essentially quality assurance for BMT as well.
Oh, okay. So like a whole breadth of experience, not only being a TI and pushing flights and getting to shape the next generation of airmen, but then also you've had a chance to like serve in a bit more wide perspective scope where you have more of an idea of like what's going on at the organizational level and stuff like that.
Absolutely, yes.
That's awesome. Okay. So I always get, it's really funny because there's an impression made on every airman in basic. And there are so many times that we run back into TIs throughout our careers, and there's a sense of awe about it. It doesn't have to be a TI that's commensurate with the rank of the guy who pushed your flight, or that was whatever the case was. It doesn't have to be someone of the same rank. It can literally be anyone who is a TI, wears that hat, has that walk, and that voice, right? So the way they teach you how to speak, right, it carries a different value to it. And I get really excited when I get the opportunity to talk to a TI, because there's like all those questions in your head when you're in basic, and you can't ask most of them because you're not friends with this guy. He's not there to be your buddy. He's not there to, be your friend and be your shoulder to cry on. He's there to shape you, which typically takes breaking someone down before you can build them back up again. And so like I've got all these questions and stuff, and I have done this with recruiters, or not recruiters, with TIs in the past, where I'll ask, for silly questions and like, during amnesty hour, like, or whatever, like, hey, how did this go? So I'm going to stick to my script on this one and go with the questions I've written down and try not to get too terribly excited. So, we, as all airmen, yourself included, anybody who's enlisted in the Air Force had to go through basic military training, which is what we're talking about today for the show. But give us an idea of what it takes to become a TI, because you had to go through basic at the beginning of your military career as well. But then when you were selected to be a training instructor, you would then have to go through an even more intensive additional set of training. Like, what is TI school like? Like, talk to me about that.
Absolutely. And so for TI school, it's about 10 weeks long. It's where you go through learning essentially the basics of being an instructor, because MTI school is only one portion of your training to become an MTI. You could say it's more of the classroom focused portion of that training. Again, you
Mm,
learn about the rules about being an MTI. How do you interact with trainees? What are the do's and don'ts, kind of the left and the right goalposts, so to speak. And a decent portion of MTI school as well is learning how to actually instruct or teach via different methods. To through everything as an MTI, whether that's teaching drill, teaching dormitory application and setup, teaching even something as go as far to say life skills as well. But that's
okay.
all encompassed in MTI school. We have various levels of measurements that we have to pass, and then to which when we finally finish MTI school, which again is a 10-week process, you're still not an MTI necessarily yet. There's a training qualification process that lasts a number of months after the school is complete, where you could say that's the hands-on portion, where that's where you are leading a flight with an MTI
Mm,
trainer
okay.
to then get signed off and be ready with all your skills to push a flight by yourself.
That's crazy. What was it like when you pushed your first flight? Because the idea of applying for or trying to be picked up to be a TI, a lot of people think about it, whether it's for them or not. But one of the apprehensions a lot of times is like, there's a lot of eyes on you, and you have to be basically the model of perfection. Because how can a bunch of, young trainees look at you and watch you mess up and be expected to perform at the highest level of perfection? Like, what was it like pushing your first flight?
Absolutely, that's a good question. Yeah, it wasn't easy, honestly. I could really relate it back to what it would kind of like what it was like going through BMT, and by which I mean it's a new environment. I spent, like I said, the majority of my career being a medical laboratory technician, and being an MTI is completely different. Perform their job in the Air Force, regardless of what that is. And so, getting back to the question, there's a lot of mistakes made, to be completely honest, with my first
Sure.
flight. Because, like you said, a lot of pressure about wanting to be as perfect as I can be to set that to set that really good first impression for the trainees underneath my charge,
Right.
and showing what an airman should be, how you should act, how you should speak, how you should carry yourself, the work ethic you have, the drive. All of that is extremely important, but it was definitely full of a lot of mistakes, but things that helped build me into the MTI and leader I am today.
That's awesome. It's cool to hear that you can still be human, right? So there has to be a margin for error, but the training that they put you guys through to teach you how to do that helps you also navigate those in a way that doesn't make you look less than and still allows you to be a model for these young men and women to shoot for, right? To attain that level of crispness, perfection, level of drill, and all the stuff that you do, because TIs are squared away when it comes to that stuff. Like, you guys got to know your movements. You have to be sure, you have to be confident and be able to do it. So it's cool that that's kind of trained in there, because TIs are still human, even though many of the guys and girls underneath them, while they're in basic, may not think that they're human. I didn't think my TI was human. There was a whole other level. Like, and pretty much every TI I've met since then, it's just like, what do they feed y'all in there? Like, that's something different. So, okay, next question. How is basic training different today, and what you see with the flights that come through Lackland? How is it different than when you went through? And if you don't mind my asking, what year, how long have you been in? Like, what year did you come through?
So as I said, I've been in for 17 years. So I came through in February of 2007.
Okay.
So absolutely, if we think back to what was going on at that time, and what we were training for, it was definitely a little bit of a different atmosphere. But I would not say that it's incredibly different. I
Sure.
guess what I would highlight is perhaps some differences is that portions of our curriculum, things that we teach, are a bit different now than they were back then. By which I mean, MTIs have more of an opportunity now to bring in some more of those NCO or non-commissioned officer leadership experiences into being an
Mm,
MTI, sharing a bit more of that with the flight, so to speak. And that comes in a lot of different forms. But teaching them, I guess what I would say is airmanship skills, so to speak, like putting more of an impression on, what it means to be an airman, what it really means to follow these core values. We have, of course, integrity first, service for self, excellence in all we do. And I don't mean to say that like back in 2007, those things were important and were not instilled on us, but I just think the curriculum is it's configured a little bit differently now to have more opportunities for that, is what I would say. But otherwise, a lot of the expectations are the same. I guess to speak to the opposite of your question, if I may, by which I mean, there's still a high level of accountability. As a trainee, it's the expectation, right, that you're going to be giving a lot of feedback constantly, and a lot of follow up on things you're being told and corrections that are being made of you and things you're expected to do that you're just not used to from your prior life, very likely. So all those things still very similar.
Gotcha. That's very cool. Is the current curriculum as demanding mentally? Because I know one of the big things about Air Force is like a lot of the other branches say, well, Air Force Basic is easy. Well, I can assure you it's not easy, but it focuses potentially less on the physical than other basic or other military basic trainings do. And there's a significantly higher requirement for the mental aptitude and for the ability to process under high stress scenarios. Is that level still kind of up there as well? Is that still at an elevated training level?
Absolutely, yes. I see where you're coming from, right? Where you're saying, some folks out there might think, well, hey, Air Force is more of one side of things, not quite the physical. It definitely encompasses all things, but to bounce off of what you're saying, no one portion ultimately of BMT is difficult by itself. However, it's everything put together, right? It's all the requirements that have to be met. It's all the high level of expectations that the MTI places on the trainee. So sure, by itself, hey, going to these classes and learning the material required to have a basic understanding of what it means to be an airman, to be serving in the Air Force, and then taking a test on that 8 weeks later, that by itself, sure, not entirely difficult. However,
Sure.
when you mix that in with, with all the other things that a trainee has to do, having to understand and execute commands and drill, setting up their areas in a very specific way, following orders, showing those core values and acting in a way that's different than what they're expecting before. All those things encompassed, that's basically that's what we call inoculating stress, right? That's a large part of our job as an MTI is, to be honest, is to create a stressful environment in which you will be tested amongst all these things. And so that way, when you come out on the other end 8 weeks later, we can say, hey, we are confident that this trainee is prepared to meet, the challenges that are expected of them as they move on to technical training.
Nice. I am taking notes on some of that answer that you gave because you put those points together better than I have before. And I really like the way you said that no one particular part of basic training is super difficult, but combined together and the expectation at the level of performance that is expected of every trainee and the stress inoculation, that can get to the point where that was when you start to find your own limits. That's where you start to find your boundaries and your comfort zones where you've never had to do something like this before. And it shows you who you are and who you're capable of. And I can tell you from experience, that's empowering. Like, that's really cool to know that you were put in a situation that did not look like something you could do. And you probably couldn't have by yourself, but teams come together in basic and you rely heavily on the guys and the girls to your left and right. I'll tell you that right now. I'm really glad I have a producer on the other side of this keyboard because while I'm sitting here geeking out with a TI and asking all kinds of questions, I've completely forgotten about the fact that we have the rest of the show to do. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see questions for the guests. And we'll actually get to our second guest, who is our recruiter, in a little bit. But for right now, I see the comments coming through, and you guys know I see a lot of questions coming through as well, but put a Q in front of your comment. That way we know that they're questions and we can add them to the questions bin. And then at that point in, probably like 10, 15 minutes, we're going to get to those questions. We're going to put them up on the screen and we'll let our guests answer them right here live on the show. So thank you, Mike, the producer on the other side of the TV wall, for reminding me that, because I was like, why is he throwing graphics up there? Right. I haven't mentioned that yet. So it's nice. It's nice to have somebody you can count on. So appreciate you. All right. So I would say probably a large majority of people that join the Air Force that come to basic training have very little idea of what they're getting themselves into, right? So they don't have a very holistic approach to it. They just have this this determination to do it. They know it's something they want. They've probably done some research, but generally woefully unprepared, which is not a problem because no one's really ever prepared for something like that. What is one thing that you wish you could tell recruits, trainees that are coming into the Air Force before they actually get off that bus at basic training? What's something that you would tell them? Like one thing.
I think the biggest thing I would tell them, because there's a lot of practical things we could talk about, right? That could help portions of BMT. But if I had to give one large piece of advice, it would be to mentally prepare. And what I really mean by that is to mentally prepare for the things that I already spoke about in answering some of these questions. It's preparing for, being put in very uncomfortable situations that, again, very likely for the majority of trainees, they haven't been put in. By which I mean, someone, of course, is going to be speaking to them in a tone or in a volume that they're not going to be used to. They're going to be told what to do, nearly every minute of the day. There's always going to be something to do. There's really not, if any at all, downtime at BMT. There's always some mission to accomplish. There's always some task to handle, always something to get better at. And so mentally preparing, working yourself through, like, okay, there's going to be higher expectations. I'm going to be approached in different ways. I'm going to have to listen to my person to my left and right in my flight as well, that are my peers, essentially peer leaders, that I'm going to be told, hey, these are the individuals that I have to listen to as well, aside from my MTI. And that takes another level, of emotional intelligence and mental preparedness, to listen to what my person next to me is saying as well, or perhaps in my experience, I've been a lone wolf, so to speak, or I just do what I want when I want to. And I guess what I would add on to that with the mental preparedness is just, to bounce off something you said earlier as well, is knowing that you're going to probably run into some walls. By which I mean, walls in what you think you're able to accomplish, whether that's physically, mentally, in dealing with stress and having resilience to handle the different challenges of BMT. And so what I would say to all that is that BMT is going to give you all the tools necessary to handle these things. You're going to be taught all of that. However, nothing will be done for you. Nobody in BMT can do a thing for you, so to speak. The MTI certainly will not. The people you're left to right are going to be there for you to help you. And of course, the MTI is going to be there to motivate you, to inspire you, and to correct you and get you where you need to be. But it's having that drive to be in BMT, to follow orders, to basically break through or climb over the walls you're going to encounter, because you can. But the mental preparedness, that's going to be the largest piece that's going to get you ready.
Gotcha. That's a good one. I love the answer. And it's also not a cheat sheet. Like, how do you decipher what mental preparedness is for something like that? And I think that's up to the individual. So solid answer. Appreciate that. All right. I am going to, at the risk of getting something thrown at me from the other side of the room, I'm going to throw a question up on the screen because I don't think we can wait for this one. It's out of order and I'm not going to let the floodgates open completely, but I do want to get one question up. Let's go ahead and put that up there. Cool, he did it. Sweet. On a scale of 1 to 10, how hard was boot camp? How hard was basic? And obviously, you're the professional here, and you can do it on your own experience or however you prefer to answer.
So I guess I'll give two pieces of that. Piece one is how hard was, boot camp? How hard was BMT for me? To give just slightly a bit more about myself personally. So I come from an Army background, by which I mean, both my parents were in the Army. So I guess, in a way I was mentally prepared in that facet, like I just talked about, for it. So while I didn't find in that aspect it was hard, I was able to get on the bandwagon, so to speak, on what was expected. But it was definitely challenging, 100%. I would never say that my experience was not hard or was not challenging. I distinctly remember, going through phases of growth in BMT where I was reflecting on who I was at that time when I came in, all the things that, I learned through life, and particularly what my parents were trying to instill in me and were teaching me. And a lot of those things were kind of coalescing during those 7.5 weeks or 8.5 weeks, combined with what I was being taught and what I was experiencing. And I really had to take all those things and figure out, okay, well, who do I need to be, or how do I need to change a little bit of who I am and how I operate to become an airman. So it was 100% challenging. And if I had to talk about, the experience of today, again, it's very similar. I mentioned earlier about how BMT's changed, a bit in some ways, but those overall, basic challenges that I had in BMT are pretty much the same. Everyone's going to go through a different growth cycle, so to speak, in BMT, but make no mistake, you will be forced to grow and to change, and, not to become a completely different person or, a robot, so to speak, for the Air Force, but it's definitely going to require you to change and to get through, some mental, physical, and otherwise blocks to get through. And I think that was the most challenging part for me, and what I think is the most challenging part for trainees as a whole.
Awesome. Solid answer. Appreciate you doing that for me. I'm glad you had like the energy to throw a question out for one on the screen, since we went over this before the show even started. I was like, yeah, the questions won't be up on the screen until after we meet our recruiter and all that stuff. So thank you very much. We're going to go chat with her for a second. Stay right there. We'll be right back. And then we're going to get in the back and forth part of the show. Okay, so one of the coolest parts about this show is the fact that we talk to people that are in specific career fields, and then we also have a recruiter on the show with us as well, because you guys are obviously really interested in what it takes to get into the Air Force. So you have a lot of specific questions, and nobody answers those questions like a recruiter. Introducing Tech Sergeant McDuffie. Hello, ma'am. Welcome to the show. Introduce yourself for us.
Hi, thank you for having me. I am Technical Sergeant McDuffie George. I am excited to be here, so thank you for having me. I've been in the Air Force 14 years. It's been an amazing ride for me, more so because 10 of those years I started off as a reservist. I take pride in that, but the simple fact is I got to live in the civilian sector so that whenever I recruit, I can speak that language to the average civilian to know what it takes, the drive, the motivation to be recruited. After spending 10 years on the reserve side, I was selected to come into the prior service program to be a recruiter. And that is now I get to inspire, engage, and recruit the newest, innovative airmen. And that gives me so much pleasure because Gen Z is powerful. So I take very much so pride in doing what I do with wearing this recruiter badge.
That's awesome. I appreciate you taking time to be with us today. So something that I like that you said very first was you said, I was reserves, and then you just dumped pride on that. Like, I appreciate that. That's really cool because there's a lot of feelings one way or the other when people are like, oh, which is better, reserves, Air National Guard, Air Force, and RegAF. And it depends on who you're talking to, because everybody wants to identify with their choice as the best one. And most of the time that's the best choice for you. But if you got a RegAF guy talking to someone who is in reserves, that person in reserves may think that's the best choice they've ever made in their life, and they're going to think that's the best decision. So it's fun because the opportunities are pretty much the same all the way across. But I love to see that you've had the experience in multiple opportunities, and you still have love for the start where you came from, and then the reserves as well. So thanks. I appreciate that. And it does. It really kind of helps our message of like, yes, it's Air Force and it's big, there's got all these opportunities, but those opportunities are really powerful no matter which ones you pick. So you said, you said that, so what's been your favorite part about being a recruiter specifically?
Well, I was always told that I was queen of being in the community. I absolutely love being in the community. The reason being is when you're in the community, you get to see an individual in their organic state of why they want to be better, be better, receive higher opportunities, and achieve greater accomplishments. So when you're in the community and you're putting boots on ground, you actually get a chance to be hands-on with who you are recruiting. So I, hands down, would say being in the community has been my most favorite parts of being a recruiter.
Okay, so you're definitely like a people person, being able to get out there and talk to and talk to people and understand what makes them tick. That's got to be cool. I've always kind of considered, because just like TI, it's interesting for anybody out there that doesn't know, there's this process in the military where you're kind of like identified and selected for a very special job on top of the job that you normally do. So like Sergeant Griffith said earlier, he was, and I forget, I think it was Medical Lab Corps, but he was involved in the medical field in the Air Force before he was selected to be a TI. Well, the same thing happens for recruiters. You can't just come in and become a recruiter. You have to be top of your class, best of the best, and then identified and selected, and then go through additional training to do that. So to be able to go through that process and exemplify your love for the community and your need to be out there with people is something that I can identify with. I can see the draw to it, right? To be able to put people in contact with this experience and this opportunity to show them a side of life that so many people just don't get a chance to experience has got to be probably one of the coolest, most fulfilling things ever. So that's really, really cool.
Yeah.
So
I always tell my recruits whenever I get out in the community and I talk to my recruits, I always tell them, eliminate fear. When you eliminate fear, what can you accomplish? And I'm a walking example of what you can accomplish. I came into the Air Force with no degree. I now have three. I tell that
Oh
the
my
story
gosh.
all the time. For the simple fact is when I was before I was a recruited, I didn't see that being a possibility. So I always point out real life factors that I know that can make a difference in someone's life when I'm out recruiting, because that matters. People identify when you are being authentic. When you are being authentic, you are going to draw individuals to your brand. And for me, that's the United States Air Force. So wearing this uniform is a brand within itself. And people identify with brands. And I proudly wear this uniform to attract to this brand.
I can feel that. I can tell that you mean that because I can hear it coming out. You know, it's your soul, right? I got to back up a
Yes.
little bit. You said 3 degrees. Now, it is not uncommon knowledge that you can pursue additional education while in the military. Air Force has tons of different programs to help you get your degree. You can get your associates through whatever career field you have, and then you can continue to pursue, and the Air Force pays for it, which is awesome. But 3? Like, walk me through that one. Like, what drove you to go for 3 degrees? Like, and did you pay for any of them? Was it hard? Like, tell me about that.
That's a good question. So I decided to pay for school. Whenever one of the benefits of joining is your education being 100% paid for. So therefore, I received my bachelor's degree in social work, and I was able to be a social worker in the community when I served as under the reserve component.
Okay.
However, all of our AFSCs come with an associate's degree. You are
Yep.
super competitive on the civilian side, whether you choose to stay or leave, because of not only the education you receive, but the credentials you receive within your career field too, as well. You go
Yep.
unmatched on the civilian sector because you walk away knowing that, hey, I am an asset to society, all because the United States Air Force gave me a platform to execute my education and no debt.
Okay. I'm like formulating a quote in my head right now based on what you said. Powerful stuff. I love it. So you're saying military education and experience goes unmatched in the civilian sector. That is powerful. That is
Very
incredible.
much so.
I love that. That is great. Well, awesome. Thank you for being on the show with us. We are going to look forward. I've seen some of the questions coming through. I'm looking forward to getting some of your input and some of your insight into some of these questions because we've got a ton of them that are recruiting based. Also, we
Sounds
have a
good.
ton of questions in there. So we're going to go back up to our 3 up and get Sergeant Griffith back on here, and we are going to put our first question up on the screen. It is time for the back and forth. See, there it is. First one up, recruiter question. I'm 40. I'll be 41 by September. Can I still get in? Ma'am, this one's all you.
Yeah. So that's an amazing opportunity that we have extended the age limit. So as long as you are fully enlisted before your 42nd birthday, that is definitely something that can be accomplished.
There you go. That's a yes. Go talk to your recruiter. You have time, but not a whole lot of it. So pitter patter. All right. Next one. How long is an ASVAB test good for? There you go. There's another recruiting question.
Your ASVAB scores are good for 2 years. So therefore, if you have an ASVAB score and you have at least 2 years, and if you have an ASVAB score, your ASVAB score is good for 2 years.
Okay. Follow-up question to that one that for me, if you have an ASVAB score and you're not satisfied with it and you want it to be higher, what can you do?
If you have an ASVAB score and you're not satisfied with that score, you would definitely want to sit down with your recruiter. You can retake your ASVAB. If you retake your ASVAB, that current score washes away your past score. So that current score now becomes your official ASVAB score, even if that old score was higher.
Can you retake ASVAB like unlimited number of times and back to back, or are there limitations to how you can do that?
So as long as you are within a passing criteria, you can retake the ASVAB, but your recruiter is definitely going to sit down and guide you to make sure that you are not aimlessly retaking the ASVAB. We want to
Makes
make
sense.
sure your reasons behind wanting to retake the ASVAB. So that very good question, but we're always going to guide and advise to do what makes sense. So yes, you can retake, but we'll make sure that you're retaking with a purpose.
For the right reasons. Got it. Alrighty, next question. What is the most rewarding thing about being an MTI? Well, I've never been one, and luckily we got one on the call. So Sergeant Griffiths, this one's all you.
That's a great question. The most rewarding thing about being an MTI is honestly seeing the airmen at the very end of training, and especially seeing the ones that you knew had a large amount of growth from the day they arrived to the day they left, which every trainee does, of course. Everyone's going to arrive not knowing what to do. What their left from their right is half the time, and can't march in a straight line. Like all these things that probably in a bubble we think is very simple. So there's always that growth. But I've definitely had a number of trainees that they went through that transformation, like I talked about earlier, where perhaps they struggled in the beginning, but then through the challenges, through giving them opportunities, through seeing that they had the value to give, I could see it at the very end. And especially when trainees sometimes would come up to me after they graduate and they thank me for for the work I put in, but the opportunities that they had. But then they share their stories with me as far as where they came from and how they didn't expect to be where they were. And that's where I take a lot of pleasure in the job. To be that mentor for them, to push them to reach heights and reach performance levels for themselves that they didn't think was possible. That's a big part for me. That's very valuable about this job.
Yeah, it sounds like, whatever we do, for most people, knowing that you're making an impact, knowing that you're making a difference, and knowing that your actions are useful and needed is a desire, right? So we all want to have that feedback. It sounds like what you're saying is you have a very exclusively, close look at what that feels like, because at the end, there is a transformation. It's right in front of you. And a lot of times you have given them the voice and the ability to tell you what that means. So yeah, it takes a lot to be a TI, but also it feels like that has to be rewarding on a level most people don't get to experience. So with the difficulties and hardships come the outcome and the rewards. So that's really, really cool. All right. Before we do next question, I actually wanted to ask our recruiter a basic training question.
Okay.
And I'm trying to remember, is basic training different for any of the three components of is it, Reg Af or Reserve or Guard? Like, do they go different places or anything, or is it all the same thing?
No, no matter the component, the BMT process is the same for all three components.
Okay, so you could be in basic training it's the exact same thing for all three of them. They go at the same time, I'm pretty sure. Like I seem to remember a reserve guy being in one of my flights, and same thing. You don't even know that there's any difference until you leave basic training. Cool, that's awesome.
Correct.
Okay,
Yep.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. If you got something to add,
I was
please,
saying correct.
by all means.
Through BMT technical training, the only time that you would know is in technical training. The reservists will then talk about how they're going to be returning home to their local duty station, where it's active duty, or going to go to a different location other than their home of record.
Fair enough. Got it. All right. Next question. Do you like pulling 341s? Okay, for that one, we're going to need a little context. Tell me what a 341 is, what it's used for, and then do you like pulling them?
Sure. So AETC form, Air Education Training Command form 341s, right? So that's an excellency and discrepancy report. So for those of you in the audience who don't know what that is, that's what it's called. But long story short is that basically if you do something incorrectly, there is an opportunity there where, an MTI may pull a 341, quote unquote. And that's where they're going to document, what it was that was done wrong or perhaps even done well. But that's basically the first stage of any sort of documentation, so to speak, of a trainee's performance. And I'll be frank, right? The majority of the time they're pulled for something that some may consider negative or discrepancy, perhaps.
Yep.
But it's a tool that is utilized to document, if need be, something that's done incorrectly. When I say, do I like it? Not necessarily. What I'll say is that MTIs, we have a number of tools in our toolbox, so to speak, on how to adjust, correct trainee behavior, actions, things of that nature. And while that's one of many, what I and many others prefer instead are just the other methods that we have, whether it's through different types of motivational training, whether it's just simply verbally counseling or speaking to that trainee in the moment, making a quick correction if we feel it's not that integral or wasn't that wasn't that dire of a mistake that was performed.
Sure.
But it is a tool that's there, that's used on a very low level before we approach any other sort of, documentation in regards to poor performance or otherwise. So.
Gotcha. Everybody's different. Everybody grows different. And it's good to have different tools to use to help grow them and mold them into the end result. So what is something that you would consider would be an appropriate or typical thing that someone could mess up on, do wrong to get a 341 pulled, just for like context? Because this could be a completely huge gray space. I've seen some pulled for some pretty ridiculous stuff. I've seen some 341s pulled for some pretty serious stuff. But like, what would you consider is an appropriate misstep for a 341 to be pulled and documented?
That's a good question. And I'm sure one that, many are thinking of as they come into BMT or before. What does that look like? What I would say is typically it's for like repeat offenses of things. So what I mean by that is, in your 0 week of training or processing week, as it's also known as, you're learning the very basics, the left and right boundaries, the rules of being a trainee in BMT. For example, providing a reporting statement, which I'm sure any of you in the audience that has already spoken to a recruiter or is in the DEP program or something of that nature, you probably already know what a reporting statement is. What you have to say before you're going to ask a question or speak to an instructor or reply to an instructor. And so that's a very common thing where after some time, and I can't give what that looks like, but usually we give it a few days or so, perhaps that processing week once again the first week. But basically for an MTI, when I know that, hey, I've taught you what this is, we've had the chance to apply it on numerous occasions, I provided the corrections to you when you get it wrong. Okay, now at this point, you're perhaps not just focusing entirely on, doing it correctly. Okay, I may feel that at that point, all right, I'm going to pull the 341, so now we can have a little bit of documentation. And as you stated a minute ago, I think that was a good thing that you said. Different trainees, different people, you have to utilize different tools for. I'll be honest, there are some trainees where I could pull all the 341s in the world. I could write all the derogatory comments, so to speak, and put it in the record as I want, but it may not fix them, so to speak, or fix the issue that we're dealing with. And sometimes it may be that in-depth conversation or some other tool to be utilized. But reporting statements, not getting it right numerous times, that's typical. Not standing at attention appropriately, perhaps doing the wrong drill or doing something wrong in a drill movement copious amounts of times, just things like that, basically. But
Sure.
again, MTI do give you, an amount of time, some shorter, some longer, to get
Right.
these things down. So there is an opportunity given.
Right. And for context, I wanted him to give us an example for that because one, it's highly opinionated. You could kind of have your own opinion of what something looks like when it's appropriate. But luckily you have the training and you've been empowered with that decision-making process. Also, I wanted to make sure that people aren't out there thinking like a 341's issued for like trying to steal something or trying to like breathe wrong. Like there's an appropriate area. It's also, all things considered, fairly small infractions, but it's things that you need to get right. You just need to get them right a little faster. And so this is like a little motivational tool. And nobody really, especially around your peers, wants to have a 341 pulled because the mockery that you're going to get from your friends is going to hurt more than the actual getting a 341 pulled in its instance. So you'll be the joke for until someone else gets one pulled. Your friends will all clown on you and stuff. So that's also, a huge part of it as well. I've actually seen 341s pulled for good stuff before, and that's like, it's weird. It almost ruins it. So it's fun. All right, cool. Let's do another question. I am a completed cadet in our AFROTC, but decided not to commission. If I decide to re-enlist, do I need to go through BMT if I've already completed field training in Air Force Reserve Officer Training Corps? I think that's probably a recruiter question. Sergeant Griffith's like, yes, it is. Yeah, can we throw it back up? I am a completed cadet in AFROTC, but I decided not to commission. If I decide to re-enlist, do I need to go through BMT since I've already completed field training? Now, to be clear, and I'm going to kind of help.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say something to consider is that
sure on that,
there has to be a delay.
Yeah, the details.
There's definitely a delay. I'm going to wait until you answer.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. I just am talking over you, and I'm going to stop.
I would say with that specific question, as a listener sessions recruiter, I would definitely want that I would refer that recruiter to talk to an officer recruiter just to make sure I'm understanding, just to make sure that their process was clear before, just to make sure that we were enlisting them correctly, or just to make sure we was giving them proper feedback.
Yep, 100% agree. And I'm glad that what I was going to say was actually pretty much the same thing. And so doing this show for as long as I have and talking to as many recruiters and listening to all the questions that come in, I've actually learned a ton thanks to you guys. So I was going to say that there's two different types of recruiters that you have to consider. There's the enlisted recruiters, and then there's officer accession recruiters. And so those things will be something you can find on airforce.com in that record or that locator that you go on there and check up a recruiter. You click like what your preferences are. Do you want to be an officer? Do you want to be enlisted? Do you want to be, and then it has a whole bunch of selection preferences that help you get to the right person. But then you took us back to that core statement, which is like, it kind of seems like sometimes the answer that I give a lot, and I haven't really given it this show yet, but go talk to your recruiter. They're going to give you all the questions to ask, and then they're going to give you the answers to the ones that you already have. So chances are they're going to be very specific questions about what your field training was, where you performed it, how it was completed, and if you have documentation of that. Once they have that information, they're going to answer your questions and you'll find out. That being said, if they tell you you have to go to basic military training if you're going to enlist, embrace that, because it's an experience that you want to have, especially if you're going to wear an enlisted rank. Your peers will be wearing an enlisted rank, and there is a camaraderie that comes from going through basic military training, for sure. Next question. What documents do I need to bring to BMT? Sergeant Griffith. Off the top of your head, I need the list, everything.
No, I'm sure, my wingman to my left and my right there on the screen could probably answer this as well. But in all honesty, so it spreads the gamut, right? It really kind of depends where you come from in the walk of life, so to speak. What I mean by that is there's common things everybody needs to have, right? Making sure you're bringing your, bring your birth certificate, bring your green card. If you have a green card, you're in that realm. You need to make sure you're bringing your form of identification, like picture ID. Most common times, that's going to be a driver's license, but there's state IDs as well. Bringing essentially any paperwork in relation to, if you have a spouse, if you have children, all of these things, all of the important paperwork, things that seem fairly common sense, but sometimes folks do not come with them. You need to make sure you're bringing with these. Now, again, after I finish saying this, I would definitely, refer you to your local recruiter to ensure you have the full list, because any documents, what I would rather impress on is that what you're being told you need to bring, you need to bring. Because if you don't, you go to records processing, which occurs either in the 0 week of training processing week or first week. If you don't have it, that means that you have to go back to that records processing later. And you don't want to have anything that's going to take you out of training with the rest of the flight. And to be more specific, what I mean by take you out of training is not to say that, if you've heard of getting recycled as in going back in training, that would cause that. However, it's just going to take you away from the flight for a couple hours, half a day. And that's really something you want to avoid. And it could be something as simple as bringing all the documents that your recruiter is requesting that you bring, because then you could have to call home. You might have to text somebody, especially if you're, out of country. That's probably an even more difficult thing to deal with. So you rather set yourself up for success by bringing all those important documents.
There's a bunch. But you will have a very comprehensive list. And as long as you start your journey by paying attention to that list, you'll be set up for success, because basic training is more of that, attention to detail and follow through. So a whole bunch of different things. And because everybody's different and what we bring to the Air Force is different, those requirements will be different as well. But your recruiter is going to have that answer for you. Next. Are there church services at BMT? Great question.
All right. So for church services, religious services, yes, there's actually quite a variety of religious services available. You'll be briefed on those in that processing week and first week of training, where you'll be shown a list that is always posted inside the dormitory that lets you know exactly when they are. You're also going to be told some limitations, though, so do keep that in mind. Well, yes, of course, I won't delve into this. As part of serving in the military, of course, means that, there's freedom of religion, and that's absolutely something you can take advantage of. However, particularly in BMT, there are some limitations on time. I won't necessarily quote them now because they could change by the time you come in, but you will be given time. However, it is allotted time. So just do keep that in mind. But you'll be able to figure out what those variety of services are once you come in and go through processing week.
Yeah. Air Force is really, really respectful of people's personal beliefs, and for the most part does as anything they can do to facilitate your practice of preferred religion. And something to consider, and this is something that I saw a lot when I was in basic, you don't even have to be religious at all to enjoy the time that you can take when there's allotted time to just go sit somewhere quiet for 15 minutes. So even if you don't normally go to church, you might link up with somebody who does just to go for it to be quiet for a little bit. So pretty cool opportunity there. Little life hack for you guys, just in case you need like a break for a minute. So you can tell them I sent you and they can come yell at me. All right, so we got right about 10 minutes left in the show and a ton of questions left, which I love to see. So we are going to do kind of lightning round, and we're going to try to see how fast we can get through how many of these so we can answer as many of y'all's questions out there as we can. So if it sounds like we're speeding up our questions or our answers, it's because we are. So go. Are there any requirements to be awarded the graduate ribbon? Take it away.
All right,
you got this.
Here we go. Quick answer. Yes, there are requirements. So one, it's only the top 10% of your graduating class. So all the flights that'll be coming in and graduating at the same time. You also have to ensure that every single progress check, which these range from your PT test to how you set up your area in the dorm, you have to pass those progress checks the first time. Additionally, that also comes down to how well you do on the end of course test as well. So all of these things are encompassed into Honor Graduate. You'll be briefed on these as well in your first week briefing here at BMT. But yes, there is a bar of performance you have to meet. And again, only the top 10% can. So if that is something that you wish to pursue, just know that, hey, you need to be doing the best that you can in all facets.
Perfect. Great answer. I don't even have anything to add to that. Next question. Can you join without a driver's license? Driving license, but driver's license, yes. Ma'am.
Yes, you can. And your local recruiter will be able to go more in depth about what AFSCs are you're able to. But the short answer is yes.
And just a tiny bit more on that. If you do have a driver's license, it does open you up to more AFSCs. And it's
Correct.
preferred that you have one, but not necessary. So perfect.
We definitely
Thank
don't
you.
discourage.
That's right. Not if you don't have a driver's license, because like a lot of people from like New York or heavily populated areas, some people don't even have a driver's license their whole life. They just, public transit is just simpler and cheaper. So, all right, next question. I'm interested in joining Air Force. I'm a registered nurse and a new immigrant here in the U.S., originally from the Philippines. So I had my permanent resident card for only 1.5 years. I'm already 33 years old. Can I still be qualified to join? That's a good question.
I love that question. And because you have multiple pieces to that question, the best answer is I want you to meet with your local recruiter. I want you to bring all your source docs with you so that the recruiter can break down not only your eligibility, your citizenship too, as well, just to make sure that you're in all qualifications to join in the Air Force.
For sure. So, yeah, I'll back that up by saying a lot of time, and you're already on the right foot because you have a bunch of answers already. You already know a lot of things that you've completed that are necessary. So talk to your recruiter and find out if there's anything else in your situation, and just be prepared to do some homework for a little while, but don't give up. It'd be worth the fight. Next question. Mm-hmm. If I want to train for both BMT and Spec Ops CCT, what should I do in anticipation for them? Yeah. Well, so I don't think SW is different basic, is it? Go for it.
Sorry, I don't want to hog any time for my wingman, but I'll just give real quick because you mentioned special warfare. So special warfare trainees do have to meet the same requirements of BMT as you just stated. However, there is a additional requirements and training, particularly of the physical variety, obviously, that they must go through. While I have not led a special warfare flight myself, I can at least speak to that. There are special warfare cadre that work with the special warfare flights and trainees throughout their training in those additional requirements before they graduate. But otherwise, they have all the regular expectations of BMT, just like any other trainee. But I would hand it over to my wingman for any additional.
No, I think you answered that question very much so on target.
Perfect. Teamwork. Next question. All I got to do is read what's on the screen. You guys are great. Can I join if I finished high school abroad?
So again, whenever we have questions like this, we always want to review the source docs. When I say review, the recruiter, if we say yes, and then a person come in and don't have proper documentation, it's like saying something that's not factual. So I, again, not to repeat, but I would prefer to say go to your local recruiter, show what you have to make sure that that yes or no is actually factual and not an assumptive answer.
Yep. There are going to be a lot of other circumstances at play, but graduating from high school abroad does not necessarily on its own disqualify you. So as long as you meet everything else, good to go. Next question. Will the Air Force pay for a master's degree as someone who already has a bachelor's degree? I think we have a resident professional who can answer a question regarding education, unless Sergeant Griffith has 4 degrees under his sleeve. I mean, and I'm not throwing shade. I'm saying it's insane that you have 3. Sergeant McDuffie, 3 degrees. I think this one's all you.
Yes. So absolutely, the answer to that is yes. That absolutely is, and that's what I am working on my MSW in social work. So the Air Force is big on catapulting individuals to reach the highest level of education. So yes, it absolutely will pay for your master's degree.
It'll even pay for your doctorate, won't it?
I believe so. I know now we're
I-
starting to work. I'm not, well, let me not quote on that because I know we're going into like how much money you have remaining and going to the
Oh,
GI
okay,
Bill.
okay.
So let me not touch too much on that
Well,
particular.
then I'm going to ping Pam or Ray in the comments to back me up here. But I think I know of I'm pretty sure I know of someone who's got their PhD while in the military, while in Air Force, and the Air Force, if nothing else, helped them get there. So like, pretty crazy. But yeah, 100% higher education is one of the biggest tenets of military progression, and the Air Force believes that to the core. So
I
next
just want to
question.
go back and clarify. I was
Go ahead.
looking at my documents, and the answer to that is yes. It will pay for your doctor's degree.
That's so cool. I love that. All right. Next one. What if I'm already in Army National Guard and have a bachelor in mechanical engineering and try to join the Air Force to fly as an officer? It's a very specific set of situations, but Sergeant McDuffie.
Oh, good question. So the one thing is, it looks like the individual is trying to achieve becoming an officer. So if you go to airforce.com, you're going to scroll down to your office to find your officer recruiter. And that recruiter is going to be able to further guide you in that process of what is going to be your next steps.
So, yep. Is it possible? Yes. Are you qualified? Don't know until you talk to your recruiter. So go talk to a recruiter. All right. We got like less than 5 minutes. Let's see how fast we can get some of these knocked out. I still see like more than 15 questions in there. All right, let's go. I need a moral waiver to, I need a moral, see. Do I need a moral waiver to join? How long do I expect to wait before a decision is made? Okay, so somebody needs a moral waiver to join. How long does that decision take, typically?
So moral waivers, we cannot put a time limit on moral waivers because there is a process of determination that is going to determine that. So therefore, the best thing is to get all the documentation regarding that moral offense. The recruiter is then going to route accordingly, and depending on what the waiver is for, will determine the time length. So
Got
if
it.
it's like, again, I don't want to put a time limit on things because there's other variables that goes with that. But as long as the paperwork and the routing process aligns together, that is going to determine the process.
Got it. Alrighty, this next question is for all 3 of us. So, I would like to know which part of boot camp is the one you remember with extra feeling or that you would like to share with us. I'll go first. That way, if I go long, you guys can just give quick answers and be like, all of it. Man, see, that's the problem. Is like I have to come up with a story from basic that I actually want to talk about. Wow. Okay, so there was this one dude who snuck one of those little peanut butter things out of the mess hall when we were in for a snack and ended up getting caught with it like 2 weeks later in his wall locker because the trash was in there and he got in trouble and got recycled or threatened with recycled. And to this day, me and my entire flight still call him Peanut Butter. It's the brotherhood built there is crazy, and it wasn't even about what he did. It was just about the story and how much of an impact the tiny little thing had on our whole flight, and what we had to do as a flight to pay for it, what he had to do pay for it. Like it was memorable. So lasting impression for sure. And Peanut Butter, if you're watching this, love you, dude. All right, somebody else give a good story so I can. I don't know, maybe a better one.
I mean, if we're going with lighthearted stories, right? So
Yeah.
I remember, so in BMT, you have what's considered like a brother or sister flight. So basically, what that means is that's the flight that lives directly across from you in the other dormitory. So in my sister flight, we trained on everything together pretty much. And so there was a time where we were being shown weapons familiarization. So particularly, at the time, how to properly utilize the M16 and how to do particularly a prone firing position. And so basically, long story short, right, is that the buttstock needs to go into, essentially the pocket of the shoulder. And so I had noticed that there was a female wingman in my sister flight who was constantly falling asleep during the lesson. And so, I mean, we all saw it, but you're not going to say anything, right? You don't want to call this person out. And she's directly across from me in this circle that we had around the MTI. And so the MTI, noticing that she was falling asleep, as soon as the MTI wanted 2 trainees to come up to demonstrate what we just learned, well, she was one of them. And so she got down and, of course, falling asleep. She doesn't know anything about what she's doing. And so she has the butt of the rifle completely back up on the shoulder, like you could imagine, like a bazooka or something like that. And she was heavily struggling with the loud and persistent corrections from our MTI to fix it. So that's one thing I'll remember forever. And I know who it is. I won't say her name, but it was a funny moment that I recall from BMT. So that's one I'll provide.
That's fun. All right, Sergeant McDuffie, what you got?
I don't really have so much of a funny story. I feel like my BMT experience, I didn't join until I was 25, so I didn't know how to march, salute, nothing. So Sergeant Griffith, I was probably going to be a MTI dream of kind of being picked on, but I didn't. I learned to blend. So my funny stories, I always tell my recruits, is I was not the person that felt like I had it all together before I went to BMT. And I say funny because who I am now, who I was before I joined, was just 2 different people. So therefore, I learned very quickly how to adapt and overcome. So although not a funny story, I still laugh at myself that I didn't know how to do any of those, what I would consider basic things for people who have some type of military training background before going to BMT.
Those are awesome answers. And I'm sitting here thinking, kind of as you guys were both sharing your stories, those are 3 very different origins of emotion, right? So they just different impacts, different things matter to different people. And it's really cool that the diversity between just the 3 of us, we have totally different opinions and perspectives on our experience, which is really, really awesome. And I think that's one of the cool things about this show, and especially about the Air Force, because everybody's coming from a different background. Everybody's coming from a different set of foundational beliefs. But at the end of the day, I mean, I get to wear the polo for the show, but I wear the uniform on every other day. We get to wear the uniform together, and we get to stand for the same core values, the same cause, and we get to do the same thing every single day, which is absolutely incredible. I want to say thank you to you guys. We got to wrap the show up. I could do this all afternoon, but we got to wrap the show up. I want to say thanks to both of you guys. I'm actually going to pop them back up on there so I can see them. Boop. There we go. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedules. I know it's been a bit of chaos to get this going for this one. We fought everything from tech difficulties to trying to figure out what's going on with who's going to be shooting from where, which is why Sergeant Griffith is actually in the building with us, which is awesome. But Sergeant Griffith, thank you so much for coming on the show, sharing your experience. And I do want to see that hat. I know you're hiding it over there. And Sergeant McDuffie, thank you so much for being our recruiter with all your knowledge and experience. But check that out. Man, once you get done looking at that hat as a recruiter, or as not a recruiter, but as a trainee, just seeing that hat will put you in your place that fast. It will change the way you look at hats for the rest of your life. And I'm going to give a shout out to, at the time, Tech Sergeant Joshua Height. That was my TI. And his hat on the back of the leather band said swag. And that man it was swag on a different level. So much love to all the TIs out there. Much love to all the recruiters out there, but you two especially. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your wisdom with us this afternoon. Everybody else out there, also, thank you. We would not be here without you. We would look really funny if we were sitting here not answering questions and waiting for people to show up. It'd get real awkward real fast. But you guys make it fun for us. You make it really, really fun for me. This is one of the highlights of my month. It's one of my favorite things that I get to do. So thank you very much for joining us. Tune in next time on July 30th. We're actually going to step it back even farther, and we're going to go into the recruiting process. So we noticed that we have tons of these questions from y'all. You want to know, what does it take? Who do I talk to? Where do I go? What do I need to be prepared for before I even get to basic training? We're going to deep dive into all that stuff with more of our favorite recruiters next time. So until July 30th, and that is Tuesday at 2 o'clock, we will see you next time.
We hope that you enjoyed this episode of The Back and Forth, brought to you by Headquarters Air Force Recruiting Service. It is a privilege for us to bring you all the information and insider insight into the exciting world of the United States Air Force. Remember, this show is all about you. We want to make sure we're providing you information and answers you need to make an informed decision about your future. So make sure to join us every other Tuesday with your questions, your feedback, and any ideas you have for future episodes. We are all ears. Don't forget to subscribe to our social media channels for even more exciting content. And also visit airforce.com for all the latest information on serving as a Total Force Airman. And with that, until next time, aim high.